Morning, WellSpring. It's good to see you guys. Glad you're here with us. Want to also say hi to those online. Glad you're here. Both of you, whether you're watching now or maybe even watching later, you picked a great Sunday to be here. This is kind of an unusual Sunday, but it's a great one. So if this is your first Sunday, or one of your first Sundays, or one of your first Sundays back, you've picked a great Sunday to be here. We want to talk about vision today, what's coming up, what's happening, all of that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about kind of how we got here. Look back just a moment to honor God for the things that he's done over these years. 18 years ago this month, my wife Amy and I moved to Spring Hill with our then 4-year-old daughter and then 2-year-old daughter. Long before they even thought about stupid college, they were with us, and we moved here to this community. It's a much, much smaller community then. I think about 13,000 people lived in Spring Hill at the time. And now it's, 45,000 or something like that. And they moved here, and we began to work towards starting this church. And there's a lot of logistics that had to get done, a lot of things that God did, and there's a lot of things that can interrupt a church, whether it be funding or whether it be staffing or something. And you had all those kind of things to work through. But in addition to that, there were some kind of behind-the-scenes things that I don't know that I've ever even talked about before that almost derailed the thing before we got started. We felt like God was calling us to come. We had an opportunity to come. There was a window of time, a moment to make a decision. But there was just all these reasons why maybe we shouldn't. I mean, I had grown up in Indiana. I had all my family there pretty close. I didn't love the idea of leaving that to come here, and even though that's what I felt like God was calling us to do. We had, my kids had good friends. My 4-year-old and 2-year-old there was a little boy in our church. His name was Wade, and they couldn't say at 4 and 2, they couldn't say Wade, so they called him Weed. And so, Weed was a good buddy of our kids. I always said I knew that my daughters would bring home some boy named Weed eventually. I didn't know it would happen at 4 and 2, but here we were at 4 and 2, and here comes Weed. And he was much cuter than I was expecting for a Weed. But anyway, but they were just all distraught that we're leaving Weed. And then we had some good friends of ours that right about the time we were announcing, they were announcing they were going through a divorce. And I thought, man, if we stayed, maybe we could help put this back together, or if we can't, maybe we could help just pick up the pieces when it all gets over. And I remember there being moments where I said, God, I feel like you want me to do this. I've been looking forward to this opportunity, and now it's here. You've handed it to me, but maybe I shouldn't do it. Like, there's all these reasons why maybe we shouldn't do it. And there was a moment where we had to kind of decide, are we going to go through with this or we're not? And that moment, even though it was very private at that point, it wasn't anything public, that moment was so huge in the bigger picture of what God was doing. We did move. A small group of people joined in, helped us. Some are still part of the church now. And a small group joined together. And on October 19th, 2003, we launched WellSpring in Spring Hill Elementary School with 257 people. And God had used our little church, our little group to start a church. And how cool was that? During those early days, we were reaching people and loving people and trying to do church. And it was clunky at times and messy at times. And right about the same time we launched the church, there was a movie that came out with Dennis Quaid and Rene Russo that clarified for me how people were approaching our church. And I've spoken this several times because it was so helpful to me. The movie's title was Yours, Mine, and Ours. It was a remake of a much older movie that had been done earlier, but those pronouns clicked with me because I realized when I listened to people talk about the church, the pronoun they used made an immense amount of difference as to how it was they were seeing our church. Like, everybody always starts in the same place. They would start with your church. They'll say, we like your church, or we don't like your church, whichever it might be. Or the thing about your church that's interesting to me is this, or your church is unique because of that. And they would talk about your church, talking about me, or our group. But then over time, they would switch to my church. And often people would even kind of be like, is it okay that we call it my church? Like, absolutely. In fact, it's not okay to not start calling it my church at some point. They would talk about my church is doing this or my church is doing that. And when the pronouns switch, it's like, oh man, now we're getting somewhere. This is not your church anymore. Now they were saying it's my church. But then I realized there's another step where they go to our church. And now it's not just the church they attend, that's the church they have ownership of. So it's not like, yeah, they need some help in the nursery at my church. It's like, we've got a staffing problem. Or it's not that we need to raise some money at my church. It's like we have a financial issue or whatever. It became our church. And I noticed when they went through those steps that their progression moved along as well. Then a few years later, in 2006, we had just bought this this old farmhouse here, and we were used to having 1,600 square feet, and now we had over 4,000 square feet. We thought, what are we gonna do with all this room? We've never had so much room, right? We were so excited. And so we thought, well, there's this one room we don't have any use for. It has an outside room, we'll start a little food pantry. And so the Well Outreach was launched in 2006. It wasn't called the Well Outreach at the time. It was just a couple of cans of green beans in a storage closet. But we called it, the Well Outreach. And so the group of people came together to launch that. We launched on Valentine's Day 2006 as a way of loving the community. And if memory serves me, that first day, no clients came. We had sweet volunteers. We had some green beans and other canned goods ready to go. People were all excited. No one came. And I remember there being a moment where we said, is this the right thing? Like maybe this doesn't make sense. Maybe there's not need in this community. There's a lot of affluences. Maybe there's not a need for a food pantry. Maybe we just need to pull back. Maybe we need to not go to all that effort. Maybe there was a moment where we said, I don't know. And we went ahead and of course the rest is history. A few years later, almost 10 years ago exactly this month, we were at Spring Hill Elementary School, and we saw that there was kids who were students there who during the week they got free introduced lunch, but on the weekends we found out they were hungry. Some of them, teachers slipping them food on Fridays and things. We heard about churches pulling together and sending backpacks of food home. We said, we can do that. So we set out to do it, and we launched jetpacks, and all these kids were getting food. And it's like, this is great. But there was problems with it. There was problems with the distribution. And several people pulled together, and we raised some money and did some things. And we had a couple there at the time who was very involved, and they hadn't been super involved. All of a sudden, jetpacks, they got really involved. And the husband, you could tell, was a little surprised how passionate the wife was about this, because she was just all in on jetpacks. And later, he revealed to me that he didn't know at the time, but she told him out of the process of working on these jetpacks that when she was a kid, that would have been her. And she had long stretches of time as a student, elementary school especially, where they just didn't have food. And weekends were long, and she couldn't wait to get back to Monday to free introduced lunch. And so she was passionate about helping those students not get the help that she didn't get when she was that age. And WellSpring went from being your church to being our church for them right then. But we had distribution issues. So we used the free introduced lunch list. If you're on free introduced lunch, we offered you jetpacks. The problem with that is, if somebody found out who was on jetpacks, we had revealed they were also on free introduced lunch because only those groups had it, and that's illegal, and people can get fired and all this kind of stuff. So they said, you've either got to stop doing jetpacks altogether, or you've got to offer it to every single student. And we're like, oh my. And so we had all these good-hearted people like, oh yeah, let's do it. Let's give food to everybody. And I'm crunching numbers saying, we can't afford that. Like, are you kidding me? There's no way we can give jetpacks to all the kids. What if they all took one? We don't have enough money. We'd bankrupt the church immediately. And people were like, come on, we can do it. And because I had so much faith, I was like, no, we can't do that at all. Like, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? But there was a moment we had to decide, are we going to go for this, or are we going to pull back? And we decided to go, and God took care of it, and money came in, and it all worked out the way it needed to. But there was a moment where we weren't sure what was going to happen. Then a couple years later, we committed to build our first building. We thought we should build a preschool at the same time. Because we're already going to build children's space, we'll put a preschool right there. Now, we didn't have the slightest clue how to start a preschool, but we felt like God was telling us to do it. So we said, we're going to start a preschool at the same time. So I still remember the day we launched the idea of it, Spring Hill Elementary School. We wanted to launch it day one. In fact, we wanted to launch the preschool a couple of days before we launched the church. Like, we wanted that to be the first thing. And so I stood up in Spring Hill Elementary School and said, we're going to launch this preschool. And did my best, rah deal. And after service, a guy I had never met before, it's the first time they were there, he beelines it. I was out in the hallway, what we called the lobby. It's out in the hallway out at Spring Hill Elementary. And he beelines it out to me and says, have you met my wife? First time we're here. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know. I've never met your wife. Who's your wife? You got to meet my wife. And so he goes and gets her, comes back and says, this is our first Sunday here, but she helped run a preschool, and she needs to be part of this. And long story short, Christy Guthrie became our first director of the Talls preschool. And your church became our church for them that first day they were there. When we're trying to start the deal, we wanted to launch immediately, and there's so many delays. If you've ever done construction, there's so many delays. And we said we're going to launch in the fall, and then it's like, okay, we're not going to launch in August, we're launching in September, and then we're going to launch in October, and then we're going to launch in November. And we kept saying these sweet parents, we kept telling them, I'm sorry, they told us, and no, they're not, and it's taking longer and delays. And there's hair I will never get back from that 4 months of my life. And you pray for Christy, because good gracious, she was so great to help them through all of that. And there were moments where he said, you know what, maybe this is too hard. Like maybe this is not supposed to happen. Maybe there's too much opposition. Maybe we should just wait a while and start it later. But today, almost 1,000 students have come through that program. And I don't know that you can visualize this side of heaven how much impact has been done on their, not just their little lives, but their families, their futures, the eternity for some of those kids. I mean, whole trajectories have been, I don't know that you can calculate this side of heaven how much that ministry does, and yet we really had moments where we're like, I don't know. Maybe we just need to step back. Building that first building was such an undertaking. I remember we started the process, everything was so expensive. We didn't know it at the time, but the elementary school was so cheap compared to building the building. And, I mean, you know what a house costs. We were building a 15,000 square foot house, so the utility bills were so expensive, and the construction was so expensive, and insurance was so expensive. And I mean, I'm the old cranky guy saying, shut off the lights, turn down the air conditioner. Like, we're not doing that, we don't have any money. It was so expensive. And I remember there being a moment, I mean, I can tell you the exact place I was at, where God and I were having it out. I was like, God, I've done the numbers. Like, here's how much money we have. Here's how much money is supposed to come in. Here's how much money we got to spend yet. We're broke. We can't do this. And then I remember saying to God, maybe this was wrong. Was this just me? Did I just push this ahead? Was I hearing you right? Because I think we may flush this whole 10-year of blood, sweat, and tears down the toilet because I wanted to be in a building. Is this just about me? Now, we felt like God was telling us to do it, and there's a whole bunch of leaders that agreed with that, and we really felt like if we did it, people would come to faith in Christ. But I thought, did we just pull back? Have we messed this up? And there was a moment, as there's always a moment, where you had to kind of make a decision. Am I going to push it all to the middle of the table to do what I think you're telling me to do, or are we going to pull back? And we pushed ahead, and the rest, as they say, is history. We pulled together, and your church, for a lot of people, became our church. And we, under the blessing of God, we did this thing. And we opened the doors, and people came, and they kept coming. And soon our way too big building became too small a building. We added a third service and then a fourth service. And then 3 years ago this month, we had our next moment where we as a group said, I don't think our building's going to work anymore. And we need to get more space for our kids. And there's opportunities for people in Columbia who are driving all this way and beyond Columbia to come to our church. And we got real focused in on a passage of scripture from the early church. And I'll just show it to you. It's out of Acts chapter 2, where Peter preached the first sermon on the day of Pentecost, and he told people about Jesus. And he said in verse 37, when the people heard this, they were cut to the heart, and they said to Peter and the others, what shall we do? And Peter said, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And here's this key verse. It says, the promise, this gift, this gospel, is for you and your children and all who are far off, for all whom the Lord our God will call. And we just purposed in our mind, we pulled together, a lot of us, and said that verse is worth giving the next couple of years of our life to. Like that's what we're going to be and do for the next 3 years. It's like that's enough. We were trusting that the promise was still real, that God's promise was still relevant and could still make an impact on people's lives. Now, I've thought a lot about this passage and the verses right before it, like we just read, a lot over the last couple of years. But I've decided this week, new thought to me, I think the powerful moment was not this verse. That's the verse everybody sees. That's not the powerful moment. The powerful moment was a few minutes before this moment. Let me just show you. Acts chapter 2, verse 1 says, when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. And they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. And all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they all began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. And now they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. God had arranged this. And when they heard the sound, God drew a crowd, and they came together in bewilderment because each heard their language being spoken. And they were utterly amazed, and they said, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language? Verse 11 says, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. And they were amazed and perplexed, and they asked one another, what does this mean? And there's always a skeptic, right? So verse 13 says, some, however, made fun of them and said they've had too much wine. It's only 9 a.m, but apparently they had a little something else to drink that day. They had too much wine. There's kind of some nervous laughter. And then Peter stands up with the 11, raised his voice and addressed the crowd and said, fellow Jews and all who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you and listen carefully to what I say. But if you weren't careful, you just missed the moment. Because I believe there's a gap between verse 13 and 14. And that gap is the moment. So God says, wait till I send the Spirit on you. And then the Spirit comes, and God uses the sound to draw the crowd. They were already in Jerusalem for this big event, and they all come, and they're all there. And then someone cracks a joke. They had too much to drink. And there's all this nervous laughter, and there was a moment right there. And Peter had a decision to make. He could slip into the crowd. He could maybe laugh it off and say something silly and then go away. Or he could seize this moment. Now, to put it in context, you've got to understand, this is the same area where they had just heard the people shout out, crucify him, crucify him. This is the same area where they had just said to Jesus, proclaimed that he was guilty and marched him off to be crucified and beaten and tortured. This is the same area where they had just seen Jesus march through the streets and hung up on a cross to die. This is the same crowd that yelled out to crucify him. And Peter's got a moment to make. He could slip off into the crowd and no one would know the difference. No one knew there was a moment. No one knew that God was preparing all of this, but they knew it. Or he could stand up and declare boldly that Jesus is the Messiah and that they are guilty of his blood, but that there's hope because of the resurrection. And Peter sees that moment, and the world has never been the same. But there's always a moment. There's always a moment. And for those 11 guys, the mission went from being Jesus' mission to being their mission that day, and the world's never been the same. Paul, a few years later, was describing moments like this when he said, our God does not give us a spirit of timidity and fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline. But don't misunderstand, fear and timidity are always there. Anytime there's a moment, there's always fear and timidity. It's always there in the moment. Reasons why we shouldn't push ahead. Reasons why we should just settle down. Reasons why we should just go back to normal or slip into the crowd or let this moment pass. There's always fear. But Paul says that's not from God. And because those 11 guys made Jesus' mission their mission, the world has never been the same. So what do we do with this verse? Well, we decided it really fit where we're at. So the promise, the gospel is what we're centered around, helping people to follow Jesus. And we feel like the promise is for you. That was the adults that we were speaking to. So we need to create more space. We did that. The promise is for your children. They need more space. We'll show you the renovation here soon. It's almost done. And the promise is for those who are far off. We looked at Columbia and said, man, we got people driving from Columbia and beyond Columbia. That'd be a great place. And maybe God will lead us to start other places that are in other locations. And we'll reach out beyond Spring Hill. And that was our vision. That was a lot to take on. That was a lot to chew on. And so we were pretty consumed with, okay, we're going to do those things. And that's a lot, and schedules and timelines and budgets and all that stuff. But God had bigger visions than that. God had bigger plans, more important things than those things. So I asked the staff to pull it together for me. And over the last 3 years, since we stood up and said, the promise is for you, and you showed, in those 3 years, we've had 175 baptisms. Absolutely. 175 men and women and teens and children who have declared publicly, Jesus is my Lord and Savior. 175 lives redirected and altered. And that's why we build buildings, and that's why we do services, and that's why we reach out, and that's why we give, and that's why we give our time. That's why all of that, because people can follow Jesus. You know, this is such an important time for our church. But before we talk about what's next with trusting the promise and all that, let me take a couple minutes to update you on some things that are happening right now. First of all, I want to tell you about our elder team. If you're not familiar with churches and all of that, or our church, how we do governs, our staff kind of leads our day-to-day decision-making, but we have an elder team who oversees big picture, and I report to them, our staff reports to them, and scripturally, they're the bottom lines of our church. And so we, on occasion, want to add people to our elder team, and so we're proposing an addition to our team right now. Mark McGarity has been on our finance team for several years. He plays keyboards a lot of Sundays. He and Jen are involved in student ministry and a lot of other things, and we're proposing that he get added to this team. Now, what we do when we come to these points, we never vote on things. We've never voted as a church. We've never had the first vote in the history of our church. And part of that's because there's biblically no real reason for that. I always tell people, in fact, the only time you see a vote in the church, the early church, was in Acts where Paul said we shouldn't sail, and the majority said we should sail, and then there was a shipwreck. So that's not a good track record for, now that was funny. I don't hear what you say. If you won't laugh at me, I will laugh. Anyway, so they voted, and it was a bad idea. So we try to listen to God on that, but we want you to have involvement because this is the lead team that everything hinges on. And when this team gets sideways, church is getting messes. So what we do instead is we want each person to have abilities to help out with this. So in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, there's a list of things that what an elder looks like. And we would invite you to look at that list, read those lists, pray through that. And if you know things about Mark that we may not know, we think he lines up with that list real well. If you know of things we don't know, come talk to us. We'll give you the whole month of April to pray through it, think through it, let us know about it. Assuming there's not something that we're not aware of, at the end of April, he'll join our team and we'll be better for it. But if he's an axe murderer and you're aware of that, we need to know that because we try to keep axe murderers off the team. So if you can help us save us from that, that'd be great. Also, to let you know, one of the reasons we want to add more people to the team, even still, we wanted to grow the team beyond what it is. But Ed Baines, one of our elders, is just stepping off of the team right now because he recently retired from 25 years in the police force. Thank you for serving the community. And so he has joined, yeah, absolutely. So he has joined our staff and leads our facilities team. So it doesn't make sense to have a staff person who's also in the eldership and all that. So he's stepping off. Mark's going to be taking his spot, and we'll be wanting to add more. Second thing I want to update you about is our student minister search. So we have a vacancy in student ministry right now, and so I wanted you to know that was still in process. That you don't hear a lot about it, but that's still something that we're doing. And we have received, I think, about 50 resumes and done interviews and all that kind of stuff. We're just really picky because we feel like our students need exactly the right person, and so we're going to be really particular about that. But that's still in process. Another thing that we're doing right now is our residency program. So the resident program, we've told you about maybe before. You've heard us say we're going to bring in college students, some maybe during their college years, some post-graduation, to come and do a residency with us for maybe as much as a year, 15 months even. And it'll be a real win-win deal because we're going to pour into them, give them a great start-off experience and all of that, while at the same time they're helping us out. And I want to let you know that this summer, we're going to have 3 residents with us, if you want to put the picture up. So on the right is a guy named Noah. He's going to be with us for 12 months starting in May. So a whole year serving in student ministry, which is great timing to help with the vacancy we've got. Also, Emily in the middle is going to be here just for the summer, but she is my favorite. I got to be honest about that. So that's my daughter, Emily. She's going to be with us also in serving in student ministry. And then Dane on the left will be with us for 7 months. So we got 3 different ones, 3 different times, all serving in student ministry. So your students are going to have a lot more cool factor than they've had with the old people for a long time. And we're very excited about I appreciate you not clapping for that. That was really helpful. That was good. So anyway, all 3 of those guys are going to be joining us starting in May, and we're very, very excited about that. The fourth thing I want to tell you about is a sermon series that's starting next week. So I always like to start a sermon series on Easter because we have a lot of guests come the first time on Easter, and nothing says welcome and feel like at home like me getting up and saying, we're in week 16 of a 18-part series and you've missed the first 16 and you're clueless, and welcome. You know, that doesn't work. So I like to start a series on Easter. So we're starting a series next Sunday called Help My Unbelief, which is based on a passage some of you may be familiar with where Jesus has an interaction where the guy says, I believe, but help my unbelief. And we want to take 4 weeks to help unbelief. So if you have doubts, this series is for you. If you've been wounded by churches and kind of put off a little bit, we're going to talk about that. This series is for you. If you have objections to faith because of the Bible or because of things outside of the Bible, this series is for you. 4 weeks. So what I want you to know is this is a great time to invite friends, neighbors, coworkers who have unbelief that they need help with. We want to do that over these next weeks, okay? So right now we're in a moment. We finished the building, renovation's almost complete, and there's a lot of reasons to settle down. We're in the middle of a shaky economy. You know, we're still shaking off this global pandemic. There's more political unrest than any time in my lifetime, and we could just walk away from this moment. Kind of slip into the crowd of history, just let everything settle down and go past. And we could do that, We could do that. But in my lifetime, the world has not needed Jesus as much as they do right now. And in my lifetime, I don't know if there's been a better time for the church to step forward and be on offense versus being on defense than right now. The world needs Jesus, and the church needs to get their act together and do their best. And this is the moment. And I need this to be a moment where this switches for a lot of you from being your church to being our church. And we wrap in and do this together, where WellSpring's mission of helping people follow Jesus becomes your mission. Jesus' mission of changing the world becomes your mission, where Jesus' passion for the lost and the hurting and the lonely and the scared becomes your passion. And you can't tell where Jesus' passion leaves and your passion starts because it's all together and merged. And we need this to be a moment for us together. And these 4 items would be actually a great place for you to start on all of that. You know, the elder team, I want to ask you to pray for the next 30 days, all of April. Beyond that'd be great too, but all of April for sure. Pray for that. Pray for Mark, pray for our team. If you know of people we should be talking to add additional people to the team, maybe that's you. Let's talk about that, and that's what you could do in April. Student pastor, let me use the March Madness, since it's March Madness, let me use a basketball analogy shamelessly. What happens when somebody gets injured or gets knocked out for COVID or something? What do they always say? Next man up, right? Next man up. And right now, Melissa Cook, who leads our next gen department, so typically she has student and children underneath her and residency and all that. She's had to put a lot of time and energy into students, which is great. Ministry's going well. But that means she has less time to give to children than she normally does. We don't have a full-time person in youth. She's not able to give as much to residency as she would because of the other. And we need some people stepping up. Not that there's problems, just it's next man up. There's a vacancy. We're going to fill the vacancy. But in the meantime, if you want to help with children's, volunteer in that way, that'd be great. If you want to help with students, volunteer in that way, that'd be great. If you just want to come and say, how can I help? That'd be great. We can find options for that. On the residence end, over these next couple of months, we're going to let you know a lot more ways, specifically, tangibly, of how you can support these 3, because we don't want this just to be a deal where they help us out. We want this to be a deal where we launch them into a lifetime of ministry. And your support and encouragement goes a long ways for that. Really does. On the sermon series, I want to ask you to invite people. We're going to post some things to social media. If you're on social media, share that with your friends. Post about it yourself. If you have people in your life who have doubts, this is a great time to maybe specifically reach out to them. For those of you who are watching online, you can do this. For those of you in person, invite your friends to this. You know, if you're here and in person, invite friends to come with you and sit in the same service you sit in. Go to lunch or brunch afterwards. That'd be awesome. For those of you watching online, host a watch party and say, come to my house. It'll be just a couple of us. And that way it's not a big awkward group. Or do a little watch party and I'll be separately on social media or whatever. I don't know how to do any of that, but you can ask our team and they'd be glad to help you with that. All right. The idea is this needs to go from being WellSpring, being the church you attend, my church somehow. It's not my church. This is our church. And those 4 practical ways would be a great way to help. If you're saying, I don't have any idea what next step is, go to LifeTrack. Well, that's what LifeTrack's for, is to walk you through how to go from it being your church to being our church. And we want to help you with that, okay? Another practical way that you can participate is through this special offering. Now, we don't push money a lot. We don't talk about it a lot. God provides, and churches are too guilty and all that stuff about that. So we don't do that. I'm not going to do that now. If you've had bad experiences around this with churches, don't get nervous. We're not going to do all of that now. But I also know for me, maybe you're not like this. For me, I know the impact I can make in life. I know what I can do well or not do well and stuff. And I need to be part of something bigger than me. And I know when I put my time and energy in with other people who have talents I don't have, we can make a much bigger splash than I ever could on my own. It's the history of our church. And financially, I know what I can do, and when I do what I do, it helps, but we can all pull together. Man, to be part of something bigger than me is really exciting in this world. And so if you feel called to do that, we're gonna leave that opportunity for the next week or so. We're not gonna talk about it at Easter because it's not about Easter. But if you want to give beyond your normal gift toward this special offering, we just ask you to designate that amount towards trusting the promise. You can do that on the app. You can put it in the memo of your check, however you want to do it. Ask the information table if you have specifics about that. That'd be fine. Part of that money is going to go to help finish up the renovation and construction, especially with the student and teen areas, kids areas. Part of that's going to help us launch Columbia more effectively. We've always said we'll finish the building and turn our attention to Columbia, and that's still true. I've had people ask me today, do you have a location picked out? No, we got to finish the building and then go to Columbia. Do you have a campus pastor in mind? No, we're going to hire one, but that's after we finish the building. Then it's always still the same plan, and that still is going to happen. So over the next few months, you're going to hear a lot more details as we're able to put more energy to that. So some of the money will go to help launch Columbia. Some of the money will help us go to reach out into Columbia before we ever bring the gospel there. This is so important to me. When you see Jesus move into an area, often before he teaches, he loved people. And he'd heal some people and feed some people and care for some people and counsel some people. And then when he comes with the gospel and says, leave everything and follow me, it's like it's a whole different place versus him just saying do, or stop, or whatever. Like we want to go in, like it says in Matthew 25, and help those who are hungry and thirsty and lonely and scared and sick and in prison and all those tangible things that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. And they need to know that the church cares about them. And more importantly than that, they need to know that God has not forgotten them and God cares. And we're going to do that. And some of this money will go towards, we're going to give it away and find ways to creatively give it away that makes a big impact so that when we launch a campus there, we've already kind of laid the groundwork that God cares about them. He's got a plan for their life. And so some of this money is going to go towards that. And here's the thing. I hope you get this. This is so exciting to me. It may not be exciting to you. It's so exciting to me. Like there's some advantages to being a smaller setting, smaller church. You can be a little more intimate. You can know everybody a little better, all that kind of stuff. There's also some advantages to being a bigger church and all that. And I think Columbia has the chance to be the best of both. So in Columbia, we're going to be a little smaller setting. I'm assuming you're not all leaving to Columbia. I think there'll be a lot of us stay here, but there'll be some who go to Columbia, be a little smaller setting. And yet when they take opportunities to serve that community, which has a lot of socioeconomic need, when they take a chance to serve the community, they're going to be a little or smaller church with the weight of a bigger church behind them. And a lot of us who live in Spring Hill who have no interest in worshiping in Columbia can go serve with them in Columbia. And we can financially give to help them serve in Columbia. And a little church can have an outsized impact and make a big difference in that community. And I'm very excited about that. And today's offering will be a seed towards some of that. So you're going to hear a lot more about that. All of that's still on track. You'll hear more opportunities of ways to get involved, ways to help out. If you want interest in serving there and worshiping there, we'll let you know more about that over these next couple of months, okay? Let me tell you about a video I watched this week. I watched a video, it's a TED Talk from Malcolm Gladwell about David and Goliath. And you don't have to be a Christian to know about David and Goliath. You just have to watch college basketball to know about David and Goliath. Anytime a small school beats the big school, like it's David and Goliath, right? And this year's all these upsets. They're talking about David and Goliath nonstop, right? Because it's a thing it's worked its way into our culture. And Malcolm Gladwell did a great talk about so many of the things that we have come to assume about David and Goliath just really aren't in the text. And they're not really real. And it was incredible to me. Let me give you some pictures of that. So if you look at the nation of Israel, you've got along the river there, you've got the hill country where Jerusalem is and all these other cities, the most population was there. And then you have a valley down to the coastline over here on the left side by the Mediterranean Sea. But in between the coastline and the hill country with the cities, there was these series of valleys that went east to west. And so when nations like the Philistines, who were seafarer people, wanted to get to the hill country to attack the hill country, they would land on the coast and go up through those valleys up into the mountains to attack. And so one day the Philistines were coming in to attack the people, and they're working their way across the valley. Saul brings the army down, and he gets on one of those hillsides, and the Philistines were on the other, and they're looking at each other. And they're playing chicken because neither one of them can move, because if the Philistines move ahead, they're down in the valley, they're sitting ducks. And if the Israelites attack, they're down in the valley, they're sitting ducks. So they're just sitting there looking at each other. So one of the things they would often do in those days is they would pick their top soldier, and he would go down and challenge the other top soldier, and whoever won, they won the whole victory. So Goliath, large man, comes down and says, fight me. And he has the big armor and the big voice and the bravado and all this stuff, and everybody goes and runs. Next day, he comes out, fight me. Kind of makes fun of God in the process. They all go and run. 40 days in a row, they do this. But on the 40th day, David, who was probably a teenager, we don't know, a younger man, wasn't soldier age just yet, comes to bring some food to his brothers, some supplies to his brothers, and he's there when he hears Goliath. And he has a moment. mean, God didn't tell him to do anything. It's a moment. And in the moment, he hears Goliath talking trash about the living God. And he sees his brothers and the other soldiers running off and hiding. And he can do one of two things. He can go off with them and slide off into the crowd and not say anything and go back on home and watch the sheep. But he knows that God's been there with him when he attacked the lion, and when God was with him when he attacked the bear, and God's helped him protect the sheep. And he knows that God will be with him here, and there's a moment, and he's got to decide what to do. And he steps forward and he says, I'll take it. And he goes to Saul and says, I want to take him. And Saul says, wear this armor. No, I can't wear the armor. And he goes down with only a staff and a sling, and he defeats Goliath. And there's a moment. But I think we've misunderstood a lot of this. I think we misunderstood a lot of it. What was the biggest obstacle the army of Israel faced that day? Was it Goliath? No. It was fear. It was fear. And modern scholars have learned so much about that battle that just was unknown to me when I was in Sunday school with the little flannel graphs and David and Goliath and the little songs and all that stuff. First of all, let's talk about the slingshot. You know, the idea of a sling, I always think about when I was a kid and I'd shoot cans or whatever with this little slingshot. That is not what we're talking about. When people that day, and in that era, especially right after that era, maybe because of David, slingers became a major part of the artillery. And when they had that sling and they would wrap it around, sling it around, and throw it, it was very fast and very accurate, up to like 200 yards. And he's probably much closer than that. And in that area, the Valley of Elah, where he got those 5 stones, it wasn't just regular rocks. It was, let me make sure I say it right, it was barium sulfate, which is twice the density of a normal rock. So experts have studied this, and they say that the stopping power, the ballistic stopping power of a guy like David with a sling with barium sulfate rocks was about the equivalent of a 45 millimeter handgun. This is not a little kid shooting birds. This is a lethal fighting force. But they're all terrified. And so David has all this ability. Now, when Goliath says, come to me, it's because he was a soldier. So he said, come to me and I'll feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the ground. He was saying it because he's a soldier. He's got the armor and he's got the spear and he's got the sword. It's all short term. I'll fight you right here. Come to me and I'll fight you right here. David didn't do that. David stayed out there and fought him. Saul even thought he would do that. Saul said, here, you're going to go fight him up close. So let me give you armor and shield and helmet and all that stuff. David stays back at a distance and takes off Goliath. Let's talk about Goliath a minute. Goliath was head and shoulders above the others. Some estimates say he's 9 feet tall or maybe a little over 9 feet tall. And you say, well, that's just fairy tale stuff. Look online. There's people in the 8 and 9, we've had people about that size. And almost always it's because they have something called acromegalia, where a non-cancerous tumor grows against the pituitary gland, forcing growth hormones to continue and not stop even when they get adulthood. Like Andre the Giant. You ever heard of Andre the Giant? All the middle school boys in you just raised your hand like, I remember Andre the Giant, right? Andre the Giant had acromegalia, where he just continued to grow. The side effects of acromegalia, 3 of them, one, of course, is size, very large people. One of them is they're extremely nearsighted, almost always. They can't see very far out. And one is they have double vision often. And the scriptures gives us hints that all of that was true of Goliath. He was very big. He also was very likely nearsighted. Why else would it make sense for this top fighting guy to have some kid leading him out onto the battlefield? And yet it says there was an armor bearer who led him out onto the field. You can't even get the picture. Maybe it's walking him by the hand. He couldn't see very well. So to walk down into the valley, once he got down there, he's fine. Come to me and I'll work you over. But I got to have some help getting down there. Also makes sense when he says, come to me. I'll feed your, he was hearing the crowd chant because there's a guy coming. He can't really see him very well. So come to me, get over here and I'll deal with you. But I am not going to be able to deal with you very well out there. I don't know who you are. I can't see you. And he says, why do you come out with these sticks? Read the text, 1 Samuel 17. Why do you come out with these sticks? Well, the Bible's very clear. He had a shepherd's staff and a sling. He had 1 stick, singular. Goliath saw 2. He was double vision. Which the reason I'm saying all that is Goliath wasn't as intimidating as everybody thought he was. The biggest obstacle wasn't Goliath. The biggest obstacle was fear. And David was able to do more than we thought he could. The biggest obstacle was fear. And not only that, David rightly gave God credit for far more than that. David says to Goliath, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Can you imagine the boldness? Just a moment ago, he was off in the weeds giving out Pop-Tarts to his friends, and now he's standing up in front of everybody saying, I'm going to cut off your head today. It's a boldness by the living God. He says, this very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. Because there is a God in Israel. And all those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Friends, some things have never changed. Our battles look different today than they did then, 3,000 years ago. Our giants look different today than they did 3,000 years ago. But the temptation to fear, the temptation to limit our God, the temptation to act like he's not alive and leading the armies of the heavens is just as real now as it ever was then. The biggest obstacle of that day was not Goliath, it was fear, and that's still the biggest obstacle of our day. It's time for the church to lean into the power of the living God. So David did kill Goliath, and David did indeed pull out Goliath's sword, because he didn't have one, and chop off Goliath's head, held it up for them all to see. And that day, the army's mission, Saul's mission, became the young shepherd boy's mission. And Israel has never been the same. It's because he seized the moment. We always have the big moment of him talking to Goliath. And all that. That wasn't the moment. The moment was back in the tents when he heard him talk and he had a decision to make. What am I going to do? That was the moment. Next week, we're going to celebrate Easter. I want you to think about what those men and women, the followers of Jesus, must have dealt with. So for 3 years, they had heard Jesus teach. They'd heard him proclaim things about himself. They'd heard him declare that he was God's son, and he healed people and helped people and did miraculous signs. Even those who didn't listen to him or care about him, they saw this is a miracle worker. And they watched him do that, and they had visions of where this was going to go and visions of what he was going to do. And then he got arrested. That was weird. And then he got falsely accused, and then they crucified him. And then when Joseph took his dead corpse and put it in the ground and sealed it with a stone, he buried more than their friend and more than their leader. He buried their hopes. He buried their aspirations. He buried their dreams. And I don't know if there's ever been a darker moment than Friday night, right before Easter in the first century. All hope was lost. Can you imagine what they did that night? Like they went to bed, laid their head down and thought, good night. Maybe tomorrow this is all a dream. Maybe tomorrow we'll wake up and Jesus will be here and it never happened and we made it up. And the next morning there had to be this dark cloud come over like, nope, still real. He's still gone. They still killed him and they may be coming for us next. And they're hiding in the upper room and it's Sabbath and they're trying to stay away from the Roman guards and they're thinking, what are we going to do now? And Saturday night comes and the ladies are thinking, we've got to get up early and go anoint that body because it wasn't done right for burial and now the Sabbath's over. And the guys are thinking, we got to hide from the Romans and maybe we need to go out and get right back to fishing again. We got to feed our families somehow. And no one thought the body was going to be raised. No one thought it was going to change. They were just getting used to the darkness. They were getting used to the moment. And then the moment came when the buried body of Jesus began to breathe. And nothing has been the same since. That moment changed everything, not just for those men and women, but for every one of us, whether you believe it or not, it's changed it for you. And now there's hope, and now there's possibility, and now there's a shot to connect with God, and now there's a shot to connect with eternity, and now there's a mission for us. That's not his mission, it's our mission. He's given it to us. He's given us this little swatch of time, this little swatch of real estate, and he said, make a difference for me in your generation, that your generation will know there's a God who's alive, and that your generation will know there's hope and healing, and that your generation will know there was a moment when the buried body of Jesus began to breathe. And I want to make sure I'm very clear here at the end. This is not our moment. The temptation would be to say at this point, this is our moment, and God's watching our moment. It's not our moment. It's always been his moment. It wasn't David's moment. It wasn't Peter's moment. It's always been his moment. And he's inviting us into his moment. And he's saying, will you share my moment with your generation? Will you share my hope with your generation, my forgiveness with your generation? This has been and will always be his moment. But he's inviting you and I to join with him. And I'm inviting you to join with us to make his mission our mission so that he can change the world. Because the buried body of Jesus began to breathe, and nothing has been the same. Why don't you bow your heads? God, I pray that the encouragement you gave those scared men and women when they went and found an empty tomb, when they went back and told their friends and they went and looked and sure enough it was empty, and then they met a gardener, and then these two on the Emmaus met him and said it's true, and then he appeared to the 11, and then the crowd saw him, and then his brother James and later Paul. All of these men and women saw the dead corpse wasn't dead anymore, and nothing has been the same. And I pray, God, that the boldness and courage you gave them on that day, you'd give to us now. Some things are so much different today than they were, and some things have never changed. Our biggest obstacle is fear. And our biggest power is not anything about us. It's always been you. I pray that you would encourage us, that you would convict us, that you would drive us with your vision and your plans for our life. I thank you for Jesus, that he is not dead, but alive, that his buried body began to breathe, and that nothing will ever be the same. We pray and sing in his honor, for his glory. Amen.